Greetings to you from Louisville, Kentucky. This is Sister Angie Shaughnessy, and I'm really happy to be with you today, whether it's morning, afternoon, lunchtime, or evening where you are. We've certainly been through quite the year, and I know that for many of us, we find ourselves thinking, what's next? We've either been teaching online most of the year or all of the year, or perhaps we've been in a hybrid mode, or perhaps we've been lucky enough to be able to physically distance and sanitize, and we've been largely in person as we taught. But today we find ourselves in a situation where we're getting ready, we hope, to go back into the regular school year, if such a thing is ever possible. And we may be wanting to sharpen up some of those tools we have in our legal toolbox. And I like to say that what I'm going to be talking about now is what every educator needs to know about legal issues now and post pandemic. We may remember some of those screwdriver and hammer sorts of things that we learned somewhere about school law. But if you're like most people I know, and myself, law is one of the last things that a lot of teachers think about, at least in terms of the things that we used to consider. Now we have to consider the new things as well as the old things. We've been focused on sanitizing and physical distancing and supervision and how do we provide a quality product virtually. Can we? I think we can. I think we have. I think Catholic schools have earned a new respect from many parents because they see that we have made it happen. Now, of course, this is not meant as any criticism of the public schools. What I'm trying to say is that we have learned many lessons that can be helpful both to us and to others in the future. But while we're thinking about ending this year and starting the next one, whether it's in person or hybrid or totally virtual at the moment, we're planning, no doubt, to be in present instruction in the fall. So let's go back and look at some of the old things we talked about in the past and be sure that we are understanding them today, perhaps with a different nuance. Do you remember how I've liked to use true and false test? It's kind of my hallmark if people have one. But today, I just want to look at 6 items that I think are really important for us to keep in mind. I've had to change my presentation with the true and false test from true and false to true, false, and maybe, and that's probably been in the last 6 or 7 years. So that's still true today. But I picked up some of the oldies but goodies, as it were, and I want to talk about them as we look at how some of these issues may have changed or may have remained the same in this last year that most of us could not have imagined 18 months ago. So let's look at the current slide, which says legal tools. And whether you have the wrench or the hammer or the screwdriver, we need to understand some of those legal terms and legal realities. So the first one is the one I've always used. Students, parents, teachers, and administrators in Catholic schools do not have constitutional protections while in school. That is true. They don't. No one in a private institution has any protections of the Constitution while they're in that institution. They have protections from the federal government in terms of rules and regulations and laws, from state and from local uh, facilities and realities, but they don't have the protections of the Constitution. We all need a little reminder about this. Most of us can recall some students saying, "Well, you're violating my constitutional rights." And it's usually around search and seizure. You can't search my desk. Well, even in the public school, you can, because in 1985, as many of us will remember in the case, well, you may not remember when it happened, but you may remember studying it, New Jersey versus TLO, the Supreme Court ruled that the probable cause standard, which applies in criminal cases of trying to stop someone or search and seize someone who's suspected of a crime, does not apply in the private school, only, or excuse me, in the public school. The only thing that is required is reasonable cause, that a reasonable person might have thought that something could be hidden. We had a saying, and we still have it, um, among Fourth Amendment scholars, which is, you don't look for an elephant in a matchbox. Well, we don't look for an elephant, or we don't look for a computer in somebody's very small pocketbook. But if we have reason to believe that somebody has something, we can search. That's a constitutional issue. You've probably had the parent or the student say to you, "You're violating my constitutional rights," and you can say, "But you don't have any." You leave your constitutional rights at the door when you walk in, and if you want them back, you have to leave. It doesn't mean that you don't have constitutional rights. You do as soon as you walk outside the door. But while you're in the building, in the school, you're under the school's rules and regulations, which are under contract law. So we want to keep that in mind. Um, Sometimes I've somewhat flippantly said to people, "Well, we can say to people, you don't have any constitutional rights," if they bring up that argument. You left them at the door when you walked in here. So we want to remember that students don't have constitutional rights, parents don't have any, teachers don't have any, administrators don't have any when they're in the Catholic school, because the rule is contract law. Number 2, teachers are required to be physically or virtually present at all times. What do you think? This is false. There's no requirement teachers have to be physically present at all times. There are extenuating circumstances. Um, you have to use the facilities. There's an emergency. You can't stop coughing and you need to get some medication somewhere, maybe out of your car. But what do? Do you have a procedure if the teacher's not in the room? Everyone stays in their seats and no one leaves. You stay in your seats, or you go to the next room and say to the teacher, "I have to go." Now, this can take a while, so you may be saying, "How am I going to do all this?" I always suggest that people appoint someone. If for any reason I have to leave the room, you're in charge. And if she's not here, then you're in charge. Now, can we do this with first graders? You'd be surprised. I think you can. Now, obviously, the level of supervision and responsibility is greater the younger the child, and that is one of the standards. The younger the child chronologically or mentally, the greater the standard of care. So we have to look at this and think, do I really need to leave? Some people say to me, you would think you could leave 7th, 8th graders, high school kids unattended, and they're more likely to stay in their seats and behave than the little ones are. But in actual fact, I'm told the little ones often do a better job. yours truly tried to teach first grade once and was not very good at it. And that was only as a postulant teaching religion to first graders. And sister said that my talents lie elsewhere. And I guess that's why I've ended up teaching graduate school. I think it's a very special person to teach small children. But the rule is not that you have to be there. It's that you're supposed to be there unless you have a compelling reason not to be there. Now, I hear from people, public and private, that sometimes it is strange how when a principal will go online to drop into a classroom, there doesn't seem to be a teacher online. Well, the same rules apply. Same rules apply that if I have an absolute need to go somewhere, okay, but I'm expected to be back. And that I think is something that people are beginning to really appreciate as parents are having to supervise their children while they're trying to work, which I don't know how they're doing it. My own niece has 7 children, 3 of whom are in college or graduate school, but she has 4 at home, and she manages somehow to keep them all on task and to help run her husband's business, their business. So I hear, though, from many people that there is a new respect and appreciation for teachers. So maybe that is one good thing that has come from the pandemic. Number 3, teachers must meet all accommodations parents request. And this one is false. There's no requirement that we have to meet every accommodation. First of all, a person who requests an accommodation must have a reason that is legally acceptable. So I may want more time for a test, but maybe I have no reason to get that. I represented a young woman recently who has this problem with spelling, and she was trying to get accommodations for a college course. And while she really does have problems spelling, the particular university said we can't accommodate her because that's not a recognized disability. So, what are the recognized disabilities? Well, I did an earlier presentation, which I'm sure you can access, which is on legal issues in inclusive education. It talks about all the things that must be in place for a student to be able to claim legal accommodations. So if a parent says, my child is ADD, and therefore he must have the ability to leave the classroom whenever he feels the need to go to the restroom or to get a drink of water. Is that in his, now I know we do not take IEPs, but is that in whatever you call the learning plans you have? And if so, why was that suggested? Who suggested it or required it? Was it a doctor for some reason? Or a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant, or a psychologist? We need to ask those questions. We don't have to meet all the accommodations. We have to meet the reasonable accommodations of an individual who falls under one of the disability protections statutes, because that's federal law. Sometimes state law can be more restrictive than federal law. So we want to keep in mind that we don't have to do everything that parents request or students request. We have a right to ask for the backup information, and we have a right to plan and be part of the planning for reasonable accommodations. And sometimes We may want to do something, but we just simply don't have the resources that maybe the public school has. And so the parents have to make a choice between our being able to offer less than what the public schools can offer in the way of accommodations. This is an issue in which you really need to talk to your principal and see where the principal is on this particular issue. Number 4, teachers never have to provide medical assistance to students. Well, obviously, this is false. Now, we're not doctors, we're not lawyers, so we're not doctors and we're not nurses, so we could argue over whether or not we have to provide medical assistance. We have to provide whatever is needed. So if a child is choking, we have to do whatever we can to stop the choking. If we have a child who is diabetic and appears to be very, very woozy and drowsy, then we need to give that child candy or orange juice or Ensure or something. To the extent that's medical assistance, we need to do that. Now, there's been much discussion over what constitutes medical assistance and what exactly can a teacher do. One of the biggest issues is around diabetes, and I certainly can't do justice to that in the time that we have. But I can tell you that there is an article in the Journal of Catholic Education by Dr. Michael Huggins that goes through the laws of all the states in terms of what can be done in each state, and if a nurse has to be the one who gives injections. What if you don't want to give injections and that's something that is called for? There are a number of options. Parents can come. You can get someone from the public school, but there will be a charge which could be passed on to the parents. Is there some parent who, maybe not the parent of the child, but who is a nurse and could come in during the day? There are options, or the child's own parent can come. Whatever is reasonable. The question is always, what would a reasonable person do? Number 5, teachers can be held responsible for one student's harassment or bullying of another. This is true. Now, what is harassment or bullying? It's unwanted, unwelcomed, uninvited words, behavior that cause a person to feel threatened. And we're seeing a great deal as I'm recording this. The news is full of stories about Governor Cuomo and the allegations that have been made about him. I, of course, would remind everyone that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. But harassment and bullying are very real. I think many of the listeners will be familiar with Jody Blanco's books, and I certainly recommend them. There are a number of great books out there on bullying. All harassment is bullying. All bullying is probably harassment. But bullying is a pointed type of harassment. I can make just a comment about somebody that might not be bullying because bullying is a pattern. But we can be held responsible if and only if, either we should have known about it, and that's a huge judgment call, or B, we knew about it and we did not do anything about it. That's easier to show. Trying to prove what we should have known depends on a jury, and generally these kinds of cases are settled long before it gets to the jury. Pandemic and related issues are reasons for lowering academic standards. This is absolutely, positively false. It can be tempting, though. And sometimes parents or students will say, well, come on now. We're not in the classroom. We're not with our friends. It's hard to wake up in the morning. We're afraid we're going to get sick. In some cases, we've watched our grandparents die. God forbid our parents die. Our next door neighbors die. We've not been able to visit people. I'm in the over 60 group myself and have found myself trying to be extraordinarily careful, as I'm sure most of you have. But it's not a reason to lower academic standards. I would hope that people are reasonable in the face of great grief, that we would offer students extra time. But we're not going to lower our standards. As we go into the fall, and hopefully we will be in a better place, I think that we may find out some things. For example, one local public school district with which I'm familiar is projecting that some students are 3 years behind now because of the year and so many months lack of being able to be in school in present. That might seem like a lot, 3 years. I don't think that would be the same situation in the majority of our Catholic schools, but you're putting in not just a different platform very often for student learning, but the lack of being around their friends. And so, as I am recording this in early March, the first week of March, I'm looking forward to daylight saving time and hoping that the sunshine that we're seeing will provide new invigoration for us. So that's just 6 things I think we need to keep in mind. There are also some legal points I want to keep in mind. They're not a lot, they're only a couple, but I want to bring them to mind as a tool in our toolbox. I've tried not to have 20 things or 20 items to talk about, but I've wanted to share with you what I see as important items. And one of these is that an educator's primary duties are to supervise students, their learning, and safety. Many of you have heard me say this over the years. Teachers' primary duty, or a staff member who is a teaching assistant or an aide, the primary duties are to supervise the students, their learning, and their safety. The primary duty of an administrator is to supervise the teachers and the staff. What does this mean? Well, as we get back, hopefully, in the fall, and everybody's in person instruction, we will be able to go back to the forms that we're used to. We've all been supervising learning. And I believe the Catholic schools have done an outstanding job of supervising learning. Our students are on track. They've learned what they're supposed to learn. If they're in a hybrid model, they've been able to learn that. I think they've learned extraordinary coping skills, and so have we. But they'll be back in the regular classroom, and it'll be an adjustment. So we have to supervise their learning and their safety. Now, we may or may not have had them in front of us for a great deal of the time, at least in person. So we have to begin thinking about safety again, or rethinking it. Not just physical safety, but mental safety, emotional safety. How do we feel at the end of the day? Do we feel, we know how we may feel, so how do the students feel? We have to be attuned to their emotions, which I think you are. It's been hard, and it'll continue to be hard for online, but we need to think not just about physical safety, but also about emotional safety. And I'd like to say, too, that in a Catholic school, we need to think about spiritual safety. Uh, as we get back to being in classrooms physically, the same sorts of things that we always said to students should be important. How we treat people. Here we treat people the way Jesus would treat us. And we keep that in mind as we go through our day. We begin and end with prayer, and I would imagine that if you've always done that, you're doing it online. But as we come back to school, let's remember the importance of prayer. Let's model what we want our students to see. I know that many of us, myself included, have probably gotten used to wearing cargo pants and sweatshirts around the house, but maybe, or maybe you're one who got dressed up every day for class. But now we're going back to school, and we have to learn some of the old routines again if we're back in this school building. So let's keep in mind these few tools that I've pointed out today. I know that this is a shortened and abbreviated presentation. I want to say that I'm happy to respond to anyone who wants to email me or talk to me. But let's remember that first and foremost, we are Catholic educators. Legal issues are important. And as the gospel says, we must render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. But we are called to do God's work and to follow Jesus and the gospel. We all know this. I don't know if you're like me, but I know that sometimes I do a better job of it than at others. That's why, as my pastor reminded us this afternoon, that we have the sacrament of penance. Most of us have found ourselves in tough position in terms of being able to practice the faith in our churches. But now we are able, hopefully, to open up and have parents come in the fall, we hope, and be part of the school community and the church community. And so it's going to be a learning curve again. But we can do it because we're not doing this alone. We're doing this through the power of the Spirit, with Jesus as our guide. There'll be bad days, and the Lord knows we've had plenty of them, but we will rise to those days. This is a time now to plan for the future and plan for going back to physical instruction all the time. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the way things were. Maybe we will. But this has been an extraordinary time to live through. I don't remember my grandparents talking about actually there was only had one grandparent in my life for much of the time. My grandmother, she talked about the 1937 flood, but she did not talk about the 1918 plague. I don't mean plague, I mean pandemic. And so it's hard to find people who remember the 1918 pandemic. But we're going to remember the 2020 pandemic. And so it's a good time to go inward. We can go inward intellectually, what I need to remember. We also need to go deeper spiritually into our roots of our Catholic faith and to encourage our students to practice their faith over the summer actively. Because in the end, that is what we will be judged on love and on if we took care of God's children who are entrusted to our care. These are the important parts of our life. And so I have one last little suggestion, only it's not so little. Hem your days with prayer. Some of you have heard me say before, be sure you start your day with prayer. Even if you only say, Dear Lord, please keep me from losing it with so and so. There is a 3-minute retreat that you can download, 3-minute prayer for the morning. For myself, I've gone back to the morning offering and the memorare. And when I wake up, I say the morning offering and memorare to entrust my day to Jesus and to his mother. So I suggest that to you. And I think that if we hem our days with prayer, we'll stay well within the we will stay well within the requirements of the gospel and well within the demands of civil law. God bless you. If I can do anything for you, please be in touch. Thank you so much.